Hello friends and history buffs, how are you? I hope everything is going well. Today, we're taking a journey into the heart of the werewolf legend, those terrifying full moon nights when the beast within man is unleashed. If this dark and shocking historical journey interests you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to join our family. Also, thinking about that deafening wolf howl made me wonder, what's your favorite movie genre? I always enjoy reading your comments. Of all the monsters that haunt our nightmares, none is more intimate than the one wearing our face. For the werewolf is born not in forests, but in the marrow of man. The vampire strikes from the dark. The ghost lingers in graves. The witch whispers in secret, but the wolf rises from within, whispering of blood and hunger that never sleeps. It is the terror that your neighbor, your friend, even your lover may not be what they seem, and darker still, that you might awaken as beast. For thousands of years, across every land, we have carried this tale, told in ritual and myth, carved in lore, shaped in faith, enduring across time like an eternal wound. From Greek temples to Viking battlefields, from medieval courts to modern screens, the shadow returns again and again, always retelling the same story. The man who becomes the wolf. The story of the werewolf begins in ancient Greece with the foundational myth of King Lion, the arrogant ruler of Arcadia. The earliest detailed account comes from the Roman poet Ovid. He tells how Zeus, father of the gods, disguised himself as a weary mortal traveler, descending from Olympus to test rumors of mankind's wickedness. But like Ion was a cruel and hubristic man. Doubting his guest's divinity, he resolved to uncover the truth. At first, he plotted murder, waiting for the traveler to sleep. Yet arrogance twisted his plan into sacrilege. Lion slaughtered a captive, roasted his flesh, and placed the blasphemous dish among the feast, daring to deceive the god with human meat. But Zeus was not deceived. He rose in fury, his disguise falling away like ash. Lightning seared the palace. Marble cracked, flames consumed Arcadia's halls. Mortals trembled at the revelation, for hospitality was sacred law. By breaking it, Leon had shattered the very order of heaven and earth, and the god's judgment would not be swift death. Instead, his punishment mirrored his crime. As Lion fled, his flesh split into fur, bones bent into claws, his jaw stretched into a muzzle, and his scream twisted into a wolf's howl. The transformation was agony and judgment entwined. His human mind endured, trapped inside a beast's body, condemned to wander as predator, cursed to hunger with no redemption. Thus was born the first werewolf, not by chance or disease, but by divine punishment. Like Ion became warning and omen, his fate echoing across ages. For the Greeks, this myth was more than horror. It was instruction. Even kings must bow to laws older than thrones, or else be stripped of power, of humanity, and of their very name. High upon Mount Leon, the Greeks whispered of forbidden rites to Zeus Lycios, the wolf Zeus. Here, men gathered in secrecy, where mist veiled the altar, and shadows seemed alive, breathing with dread. It was said no mortal entered without consequence. The mountain itself stood cursed, and its summit belonged not to men, but to gods and beasts. At the heart of the summit lay a great altar of ash, blackened by centuries of sacrifice. Charred bone fragments and scorched earth testified to rituals older than memory. Ancient writers like Pausanias described it as forbidden ground. Those who trespassed would not live beyond the year. For it was here the Greeks sought Zeus, not in wisdom, but in terror. Legends claimed that during these rites human entrails were mixed among animal flesh hidden in the sacrificial meal. Whoever consumed the cursed portion was doomed. For in that moment, the gods' judgment fell and man became wolf. This ritual cannibalism was not accident, but test, a way to reveal those marked by savagery, stripping them of humanity with one bite. Yet myth allowed redemption. If the wolf endured equal for 9 long years without touching human flesh, then in the 10th year he could regain his human form. It was a cruel mercy, a chance at salvation through restraint. The curse thus became trial, where hunger was not merely appetite, but the very measure of one's soul. This tale revealed something profound. The beast was not absolute, but conditional. It could be fought, endured, resisted. The Greeks shaped the werewolf, not simply as monster, but as moral struggle. A warning that the hunger of wolves lurked always within, and that even in myth, humanity balanced forever on the edge of savagery. The curse of lion carried a strange condition. 9 years condemned as wolf. If during that exile he resisted the flesh of man, he might reclaim humanity. But temptation lay everywhere. Hunger tore at him, and the scent of human blood was sharper than memory itself. Each night was trial, each dawn a fleeting reprieve from despair. In Greek belief, this was no mercy, but torment. Redemption meant a war against instinct, a slow gnawing of spirit as much as flesh. Imagine wandering forests, the sound of laughter from distant fires, the warmth of roasted meat drifting on the wind, and knowing that a single taste would trap you as beast forever. The 9 years symbolized discipline, a number sacred to Greeks for its ritual weight. To endure was to prove oneself stronger than hunger, greater than instinct, yet most could not. Failure meant eternity. The wolf became eternal outcast, banished from hearth, shunned by kin, living as a reminder that men were never safe from becoming the monsters they feared. The werewolf thus embodied paradox, punishment, but also possibility. Unlike other monsters, he was not wholly lost. He carried a choice, though choice came with torment. The myth reminded Greeks that savagery was not external, but internal. That man's true trial was not war against outsiders, but against the unchained appetites of his own darkened soul. Through this myth, the Greeks taught that humanity was fragile. Law unleash restraining instinct. Remove law, and men became wolves. Yet they left a spark of hope. Salvation, though rare, was possible. To resist for 9 years was nearly impossible. And yet, in that impossibility, the myth revealed the struggle that still defines us. Centuries later, myth blurred with history. On Mount Leon, archaeologists uncovered a vast ash altar layered with offerings burned over thousands of years. The ground itself was scarred black, filled with fragments of animal bones, pottery, and charred remains. It was here, ancient sources claimed, that men honored Zeus Laos, not with prayer alone, but with blood and fire. In 2016, archaeologists unearthed something startling. Buried in the ash lay a skeleton, the remains of a boy nearly 3,000 years old. His bones rested where only animals were expected. This discovery shook scholarship, for it echoed whispers from myth that human sacrifice had stained the mountain. What had long been dismissed as legend suddenly gained terrible weight. Some scholars resisted, claiming coincidence. Perhaps the boy had been buried later, intruding into ritual earth. Others argued it was proof that the Greeks did not merely imagine cannibal rites, but practiced them. The altar became battlefield of interpretation, where myth and archaeology wrestled, and the werewolf's origins flickered between symbol and reality, between legend and horror made flesh. Whether proof or accident, the discovery forced reflection. If men once ate flesh at lion, even to test the god's will, then the myth of transformation was not fantasy, but ritualized fear. The wolf became emblem of transgression, and the altar, scarred with bones, became evidence that mankind's darkest myths often root in even darker truths. Thus, archaeology gave bones to shadows. The werewolf legend no longer lived only in poetry, but in the earth itself. The altar of Zeus Laos became threshold, myth crossing into history. It left us haunted by the possibility that beneath Greece's sacred myths lay rituals where men truly fed their hunger and in doing so became wolves. The myth of lion endured because it was more than horror. It was instruction. The Greeks used it as moral law, teaching that arrogance and sacrilege tore open the boundary between man and beast. The werewolf was not random monster, but divine judgment. Each telling carried the same warning. Kings and beggars alike were bound by the laws of gods. For in Greece, the werewolf was never creature of wilderness alone. It was consequence, a fate earned by pride. Like Ian's hubris was to imagine himself above law, above the gods themselves. In this crime, he became less incarnate, that mortals who defy heaven are punished not with death, but with exile into beastly hunger, a living curse without end. The wolf became symbol of hubris, proof that power could crumble to ash. Like Haon, once king, was stripped lower than any peasant, denied dignity and voice. He retained only hunger and rage, condemned to howl beneath the moon. His punishment was not just transformation. It was memory, awareness that he had fallen with human mind trapped forever in wolf's flesh. Through stories like this, law was strengthened. Fear became tool. The myth whispered that gods watched every hearth, that Zeus himself walked among men in disguise, ready to punish sacrilege. It reminded mortals that order was fragile, sustained by obedience. Break the law, and you would not only die, but live, cursed, stripped of family, speech, and self. Thus, in its earliest form, the werewolf was not beast of wilderness, but mirror of pride. Lycan's fate showed that the greatest monsters were born from men themselves. The Greeks left us this haunting truth that the line between man and beast was thinner than we dared imagine, and crossing it was the cost of arrogance against the gods. In the sagas of the Norse, power was drawn not only from men or gods, but from beasts. At the heart of their pantheon stood Odin, All-Father, god of wisdom, poetry, and war. By his feet lay two wolves, Gary and Freki, the ravenous and the greedy. Their presence marked him as lord of the beasts and war. These wolves were no mere companions. They fed from Odin's table, devouring the meat while the god sustained himself only on wine. This ritual bond symbolized hunger beyond mortal control, the endless appetite for blood and battle. The Norse saw in this image not punishment, but power, a bond where divinity and predator merged. To emulate Odin was to embrace the wolf. Warriors prayed not for restraint, but for frenzy, for the ecstatic battle rage that would make them invincible. Thus emerged the cult of the Ulfna, the wolf-coated warriors who donned pelts as sacred armor to channel the fury of predator into the flesh of man. By wearing the skin of the animal, they did not merely mimic it, but invited its spirit. In trance, they claimed the wolf entered their body, lending strength, ferocity, and fearlessness. When the Alfedna roared into battle, They believed they carried Odin's wolves into battle. Here lay the great shift from Greece to the north. The wolf was not curse, but blessing, not exile, but empowerment. Where Zeus made men into wolves for defiance, Odin's followers chose transformation, seeking godhood in frenzy. The Norse gave us the second archetype, werewolf, not as punishment, but as sacred strength. The sagas speak of battle transiences unlike any mortal state. The Olfedna entered what was called the Berserk's Gunga, a frenzy so fierce it erased fear and horn. In this altered state, the warrior believed himself not man but wolf, his mind slipping into predator instinct. The world blurred into the sound of heartbeat and howl. Witnesses described warriors foaming at the mouth, gnashing their shields, howling like beasts, and charging unarmored into the enemy line. Two friends, they were divine weapons. To foes, terrors in human skin. In the berserker trance, neither fire nor iron could harm them, or so the sagas claimed. They were wolves wearing flesh. The trance was not madness alone, but ritual. To drink, to chant, to don the wolf skin was to invite possession. The Norse saw this as sacred practice, not insanity. In surrendering themselves, warriors believed they did not merely mimic, but merged with the animal to borrow the fury of Odin himself. This transformation terrified even allies. In battle, berserkers were unstoppable, but their eyes burned with something otherworldly, their voices more growl than word. To the Norse, this was sacred ecstasy, a state where human self dissolved into something vast and primal. It was awe and terror entwined, proof of the wolf's spirit within. The berserker trance was thus more than warcraft. It was theology. To become wolf was to become chosen, to enter pact with Odin's savage power. Where Greeks saw curse, Norsemen saw gift, a divine pact between man and beast. The berserker trance did not end when the battle was done. Warriors emerged bloodied but unaware of their wounds, immune during frenzy but fragile after. When rage drained, they collapsed, trembling as though possessed strength had abandoned them entirely. What was invincible became weak. Their bodies and souls collapsed beneath the weight of exhaustion. This weakness was dreaded almost as much as battle. For days, warriors lay drained, bones aching, spirits scattered. Families feared them in peace, not only for lingering violence, but for fragility. They had borrowed too much from gods and beasts. The debt was always collected, leaving them hollow, haunted by the ecstasy they could never fully leave behind. The Norse knew power came with cost. To wear the wolf too long meant losing the man. Some warriors never returned fully, snarling in sleep, growling at kin, or breaking into sudden fits of violence. They had lost the boundary of self. In them, wolf never slept, even when battle was far away. What Greece imagined as divine punishment, the Norse lived as divine burden. Berserkers could not return to normal life easily. They were honored in war, but feared in peace. Their neighbors whispered. Wives kept distance. Children watched in silence. The burden of godlike power was unbearable in mortal flesh. Thus, strength became curse. The berserker lived caught between glory and ruin, worship and exile. His trance gave him victory, but robbed him of rest, respect, and home. The sagas show us this tragic truth. They were not only wolves in war, but exiles in peace. As Norse society changed, kings rose, kingdoms centralized, and Christianity spread. Berserkers, once honored, now threatened stability. Their uncontrollable frenzy had no place in orderly rule. In Icelandic and Norwegian law codes, the berserk's gunga was outlawed. To fall into trance was no longer holy, but crime, a crime punishable by exile. The warrior who once protected his people became liability. Kings could not afford champions who turned beast without command. The berserker was dangerous even among kin, his violence unchecked, his loyalty doubtful. What once marked him sacred now marked him outlaw, no longer holy, but dangerous. Christian missionaries deepened the stigma. To them, the trance was not Odin's gift, but devil's delusion. Berserkers were cast as pagans, their wolf skins symbols of darkness. Gradually, fear outweighed. Without sanction, the age of wolf warriors ended. What had once been sacred practice was remembered only as barbaric shadow of heathen times. Thus, the berserker vanished, but not in glory. He faded in disgrace, remembered as wild man, dangerous exile, relic of forgotten gods. Where once his howls struck terror in enemies, now it stirred suspicion at home. He became outcast of the society they once defended. The sagas say their rage lingered, haunting descendants as restless temper and sudden madness. Power did not fade cleanly. Its echo lingered in blood. The werewolf archetype shifted once again, carrying lesson. Sacred frenzy was unsustainable for the berserker. Their greatest power became their greatest curse. From Greece to the north, the werewolf archetype transformed. In Arcadia, wolf shape was divine punishment. In Norse sagas, it was sacred strength, but strength with unbearable price. The berserker's fate was neither myth nor fantasy, but human tragedy. A man cursed by his own nature. The tragic hero was born in the Norse wolf warrior. No pact with devil, no bite of monster, only choice to dawn, pelt, howl, and embrace frenzy. In doing so, he gained power, but lost peace. His legacy was not only victory, but loneliness, haunted by the wolf within. Legends tell of berserkers wandering into old age. Broken but restless, their howls startled neighbors long after battle. They raged in sleep, snapped at kin, struck without cause. The wolf spirit could not be laid to rest. The warrior had called it once, and now it lived within him forever. Thus the berserker became figure of sorrow, admired for bravery, feared for frenzy, outlawed by law. He could never belong to hearth or hall, never escape his gift. To carry divine strength was to carry loneliness, to be cut off from home forever. This was tragedy in its purest form, and so we see the Norse contribution to werewolf myth. Not punishment from gods, but burden of chosen strength. In their sagas, the wolf was not forced upon man, but welcomed until it consumed him. The wolf within man was now a curse of his own making. In the age of faith, the wolf no longer served as God's trial or warrior's strength. In Christian Europe, the wolf became the devil's beast, a servant of darkness. Priests preached that wolves prowled not the forest alone, but the soul, whispering temptation where man was weakest. This shift was not natural predator, but supernatural corruption. Those accused of witchcraft were often called wolf as well. Their supposed pacts with Satan marked not only by sorcery but by transformation. In whispered testimony, villagers claimed to see men vanish into the woods at dusk, returning with blood on their lips. These tales turned wolf into servant of the devil and the curse into covenant. The church used fear to bind order. A man who killed neighbors' sheep might be called wolf. not merely thief but beast. The wolf was devil's mask, proof that sin was not only crime but contagion. To call someone wolf was to strip him of humanity, branding him creature of Satan's design. Trials spread across Europe, fueled by hysteria. Accusations named werewolves in villages from France to Germany. Tortured confessions spoke of ointments, spells, and midnight pacts, gifts of Satan that turned flesh into fur. In truth, these trials revealed not wolves, but terror, fear sharpened into weapon by church and crown alike. Thus in Europe, the werewolf became darker still. No longer divine punishment or chosen trance, it was crime against heaven itself. The myth twisted, binding wolves with witches, demons, and heresy. Here, the werewolf entered the age of Inquisition. No longer myth or warrior, but trial, torture, and execution. As witch trials spread across Europe, the wolf joined the witch as servant of Satan. Priests claimed werewolves, proud by night, stealing children, slaughtering cattle, spreading famine. In sermons, they were accused not only of violence, but of witchcraft, carrying ointments and spells that unlocked bestial form. Fear painted the wolf as both predator and sorcerer. In France, Germany, and Eastern Europe, villagers whispered of men who vanished at dusk, their howls echoing in fields, their eyes glowing from hedge. When livestock died, when winter starved the weak, suspicion turned swiftly toward neighbors. To call someone werewolf was to mark them for trial, for death. Accusation required little proof, only fear. The Church's obsession with rooting out heresy gave the werewolf myth new purpose. If the Greeks saw a curse from gods, if the Norse saw sacred power, the Christian world saw a pact with Satan. Trials recorded confessions of men who swore the devil gave them pelts, potions, and power to run on 4 legs and drink blood. Under torture, men admitted to crimes impossible and grotesque. Some confessed to feasting on children, others to roaming with witches to midnight Sabbaths. Pain shaped testimony into fantasy, yet each confession fed hysteria, convincing authorities that wolves walked among them. The wolf became not natural predator, but symbol of Satan's corruption of flesh. Thus, in the age of witch hunts, the werewolf was bound in chains of fuss and scripture. No longer a myth to explain ritual or warrior strength, it was folded into doctrine of heresy, prosecuted with iron and flame. In this era, to be accused wolf was to die, for faith had turned wolf into devil's mask. In 1589, one of the most infamous werewolf trials unfolded in Bedburg, Germany. A man named Peter Stump was accused of decades of murder, witchcraft, and cannibalism. Villagers swore he transformed into wolf, prowling the countryside, devouring livestock and children. His name would be remembered as the Werewolf of Bedtime. The accusations painted him as monster beyond reason. Witnesses claimed he used a magical belt gifted by Satan himself, which transformed him into beast at will. Whether invention or hysteria, the story spread like wildfire, proof to villagers that wolves walked among them, concealed in human skin. Stump's confession under torture was lurid. He admitted to killing neighbors, devouring his own son, consorting with demons. These claims, impossible yet persuasive, were shaped by agony and fear. Whether guilty or scapegoat, his trial revealed less about him than about the terror of his time. His execution was brutal, staged as warning. Records describe his body broken on wheel, his flesh torn with hot irons, his head struck from shoulders, his remains burned. For authorities, His death was spectacle, proof that the church would destroy servants of Satan. For villagers, it was both relief and horror. Relief that Wolf was dead. Horror that man could become such. The story of Bedburg echoed through Europe as lesson and legend. Stump became symbol of the witch hunt werewolf, the man damned by pact with devil, condemned by torture, destroyed by fire. His myth is remembered not as beast's tale, but as mirror of fear. How belief can make men wolves, and wolves into proof of hell. France, scarred by religious wars and famine, became fertile ground for werewolf trials. In the 16th century, dozens were accused in rural provinces of killing children, spreading plague, feasting as beasts. The chaos of war blurred crime with myth, turning violence of men into stories of wolves. One infamous case was Gilles Garnier, the werewolf of Dole. He was accused of luring children with promises of food, then devouring their flesh. Arrested in 1573, he confessed under torture to being granted an ointment by a demon, which transformed him into wolf. His execution was swift, his legend long. But Garnier was not alone. Dozens more faced similar charges across France. Trials spoke of packs of werewolves, haunting forests, of witches and wolves dancing in Sabbaths, of Satan spreading corruption through famine and fear. To a starving peasantry, the wolf embodied not just beast, but hunger itself. The hysteria reflected deeper struggles. War, plague, and scarcity demanded explanation. The wolf offered one evil disguised as neighbor. In accusing wolves, villagers condemned the anxieties of their time. Famine, disease, heresy, projecting them onto bodies of men. Thus, France's werewolf trials were not stories of beasts, but of human fear. The wolf was masked for chaos, punishment, and despair. Through flames of execution, villagers sought to burn away uncertainty. But in truth, they revealed only how deeply myth could shape justice and how swiftly fear could make beasts of men. By the 17th century, the fires of witch hunts began to fade. Yet the shadow of the werewolf lingered. In sermons and courts, the wolf remained symbol of Satan's power, though trials grew fewer. Europe grew skeptical, but memory of executions haunted its people. The myth had changed forever from divine curse, from warrior's strength into demon's covenant. The Inquisition left deep scars. Villages remembered neighbors burned, families broken, fields left barren. The wolf was more than beast. It was accusation itself. The power to destroy with word alone. To call someone wolf was to call down fire, chains, confession, and execution. Wolves in scripture became metaphors for heresy. Preachers warned of wolves among the flock, not beasts in forest, but men disguised within communities. The wolf became tool of metaphor as much as trial, a way to mark danger, invisible yet feared. Over time, skepticism arose. Scholars questioned whether ointments and packs were delusions, whether wolves were not demons, but animals. Yet myth persisted, carried in whispers, stories, and fireside warnings. The Inquisition had proven only this, that fear could transform neighbor into beast, belief into execution. Thus, the werewolf entered modern memory scarred by flame. No longer merely figure of myth, it bore centuries of blood. The wolf of Europe was not predator of woods, but predator of fear, sharpened into weapon by church and crown. It would haunt the imagination long after the PS had cooled. The 17th and 18th centuries brought winds of change, the fires of which trials cooled, yet their embers smouldered in memory. The werewolf, once chained to sermons and scripture, entered a new arena. The courts of law and the chambers of physicians. Faith was no longer the only authority. Reason began to question what fear had once decided. Judges and scholars grew wary of confessions wrung from torture. Could a man truly transform into wolf? Or were these only delusions born of pain? The Enlightenment asked not what the devil willed, but what the mind believed. The werewolf shifted from covenant of Satan into suspected sickness, a flaw of body or spirit rather than pact. Doctors began to study madness through new eyes. Cases of lycanthropy, men convinced they were wolves, appeared in medical texts. Physicians wrote of hallucination, melancholy, and hysteria, diagnosing the wolf not as curse but as symptom. Where once fire purified, now science sought to classify, to explain. This was not mercy alone. Trials still condemned, prisons still held, yet the narrative fractured. Some believed in wolfmen as demons, others in wolfmen as patients. The age of reason birthed not unity but division, superstition against science, church against medicine, law against imagination. The wolf lingered between worlds. Thus the werewolf entered a strange limbo. It was no longer entirely beast of devil, nor entirely dismissed. It lived on as puzzle, a question without clear answer. For in the age of reason, fear did not vanish. It transformed, recast through anatomy and law, dissected by scalpel as once by fire. Physicians of the 17th century recorded strange cases. Men who swore their hands grew claws, who prowled graveyards on all fours, who feasted on corpses with hunger not their own. These were no longer treated only as heretics, but as patients suffering what doctors called lycanthropy. Medicine named the wolf not spirit of Satan, but delusion of mind. In Paris, physicians documented patients who howled, clawed at their skin, demanded raw meat. They believed themselves wolves in soul, if not in body. The wolf remained real in their minds, even as doctors explained it as melancholy or madness. For the first time, the werewolf was dissected through psychology rather than theology. Yet superstition did not vanish. Villagers still whispered of prowling beasts, still feared children might vanish to fangs. The line blurred between madness and metamorphosis. Was the wolf within the mind or still stalking the night? Reason explained, but fear endured. Some doctors dismissed lycanthropy as simple mania. Yet others believed the disease could transform flesh itself, altering humors, twisting body under moonlight. This strange tension, half medicine, half myth, reflected an age caught between belief and reason. Science named new causes, yet the mystery of wolves refused neat solution. Thus the werewolf entered medical texts as case study and patient, no longer solely condemned by priest, but still haunted by myth. Madness or metamorphosis, the debate revealed less about wolves and more about humanity itself, torn between superstition's shadow and science's new light. Even as medicine advanced, law still wrestled with wolfmen. Judges debated whether those accused of lycanthropy were criminals or lunatics. If a man believed he was wolf, was he guilty of beasts, crimes, or merely insane? Courts of Europe balanced punishment with pity, superstition with reason, never finding harmony. Some trials ended in execution fueled by lingering fear. Others sent accused to asylums, chained as madmen, rather than burned as witches. This shift revealed the age's confusion. Law no longer spoke with one voice. The werewolf existed not in forests, but in legal codes, carved into statutes where crime and imagination blurred. Pamphlets spread lurid tales of wolfmen tried in Germany and France. These documents were half report, half theatre, blending fact with sensation. The werewolf became spectacle of law, its trial not merely judgment but performance, feeding fear even as courts doubted. Enlightenment thinkers grew skeptical. Philosophers argued that man who imagined himself wolf was victim, not villain. Voltaire himself dismissed werewolves as superstition, yet acknowledged their power to haunt imaginations. Rationalism chipped away at myth, but law remained tangled in shadows bound by centuries of belief. Thus, the wolf became legal paradox. In one age, beast of devil; in another, patient of physician, now defendant before judge. The trials revealed not truth of transformation, but truth of fear, that law, like faith, could not always banish the wolf from men's minds. The Enlightenment promised clarity, but the wolf lingered in shadow. Rationalists dismissed werewolves as folklore. Yet, peasants still told tales of beasts in forests. Scholars wrote treatises disproving wolfmen, while fireside stories spread their legend anew. Science advanced, but imagination refused to yield. Folklorists began to collect peasant tales, treating them as cultural relics rather than evidence of truth. In their pages, the werewolf became not literal but symbolic, the embodiment of hunger, fear, violence, or forbidden desire. The myth evolved from prosecution into literature, from trial records into storytelling. Romantic writers seized upon this shift. To them, the werewolf was no longer crime of heresy, but drama of humanity. Wolf-shape revealed the struggle between civilization and instinct, reason and appetite. In these stories, the werewolf became tragic hero as much as monster. Yet, the Enlightenment could not erase fear entirely. Villagers still whispered of attacks in night. Wolves prowling farmlands. Shadows stretched across moonlight. Reason explained wolves as animals, not demons. But in tales, animals remained masks for something greater. Rationalism conquered courts, but not imaginations. Thus the werewolf survived into modern age, not in chains but in books and fireside tales. Its transformation mirrored humanity's from faith to superstition, from superstition to science, and from science to story. The wolf endured because it no longer needed proof to haunt. By the 18th century, the werewolf had passed through every stage of human imagination. Once divine punishment, later sacred power. Then devil's covenant, it now became legend. A tale retold rather than trial endured. In this transformation lay the survival of the myth. Writers reshaped the werewolf for a changing world. Physicians wrote of lycanthropy as disease. Philosophers dismissed it as folly. Folklorists preserved it as story. Romantics gave it tragic beauty, framing the wolf a symbol of instinct and forbidden hunger. The myth fractured into many forms, yet refused to die. In this period, the werewolf lost teeth of law, but gained voice of culture. No longer condemned to purse, it prowled through poems, songs, and whispered folklore. Its punishment became metaphor, its curse became allegory. The wolf now mirrored human struggle, no longer judged as literal beast, but embraced as eternal symbol. This shift revealed enduring truth. Myths do not vanish, they adapt. The werewolf endured because it expressed something timeless. The fear that man is never wholly man, that wolf lurks beneath skin, waiting for night. Science explained away curses, but not the hunger they embodied. Thus the age of reason did not slay the wolf. It transformed it into symbol, freeing it from courts and churches, binding it, instead, to culture. From trial to tale, the werewolf entered modern imagination not as heretic nor patient, but as myth eternal. In modern thought, the werewolf is not only monster, but metaphor, no longer chained to purse or trapped in silver screen. It has become symbol of the divided self. Psychology seized upon the wolf as image of inner conflict, the civilized mask against primal impulse, the human mind haunted by its own hunger. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung offered language for what myth had long suggested. For Freud, the werewolf embodied repressed desire, the instinct society forbids, but that emerge in violence or obsession. For Jung, the wolf was archetype, the shadow self, the part of personality buried but never destroyed, erupting when control falters. The beast within is universal. In law, medicine, and story, we have always feared losing self to something other. The werewolf distilled this fear into flesh, a human face dissolving into fangs. Unlike vampire who seduces or ghost who lingers, the werewolf erupts. He is uncontrollable eruption of what lies beneath. In modern literature and film, this psychology deepened. Werewolves are written as metaphors for rage, addiction, trauma, and suppressed identity. Transformation is framed as both curse and revelation, horror and liberation. For some, becoming wolf is destruction. For others, it is release. Thus, in modern psychology, the wolf is not merely creature of moonlight. It is a mirror of the human mind, the beast we cage but cannot kill. The werewolf endures because it belongs to each of us. The fear that we are not wholly human, that in darkness something wild still waits. The werewolf became more than monster. It became metaphor for identity. In modern culture, transformation under moonlight mirrors transformation of self, adolescence, sexuality, belonging. The wolf's curse speaks to every moment when body or mind shifts beyond control, marking person as different from those around them. In stories, the first change is always violent, painful, terrifying. Bones crack, skin tears, screams echo in moonlight. Yet beneath horror lies recognition. This is the moment identity emerges. For teenagers, it is puberty. For outcasts, it is alienation. For those exploring gender or sexuality, it is revelation of hidden truth. Writers embraced this symbolism. In Teen Wolf or Ginger Snaps, transformation is allegory for becoming other. Whether adolescent or queer, whether feared by society or feared by self, the wolf becomes mirror of difference, a way to dramatize both terror and liberation of identity. Psychology interprets this as metaphor for life. The threshold state between old self and new. Transformation blurs boundaries between human and beast, social and primal, acceptable and forbidden. To cross threshold is to risk rejection, but also to find authenticity. Thus the werewolf becomes not only curse, but symbol of becoming. Its power lies in revealing identity. Society tries to repress. Through fur and fangs, stories whisper that difference is dangerous, but also essential. The wolf is not simply beast. It is the hidden self-demanding to be seen. Modern storytellers also cast the wolf as symbol of trauma, rage that cannot be contained, grief that breaks into violence, pain that reshapes the body. The werewolf becomes embodiment of wounds invisible until they erupt in uncontrollable transformation. In films and novels, survivors of abuse or violence are written as wolf-like. They carry scars beneath skin, and under pressure, the beast emerges. Transformation becomes metaphor for flashback. Panic and fury, uncontrollably terrifying to self and others. Psychologists interpret this through lens of trauma response. Fight or flight becomes literal fight as wolf emerges. The beast is body's memory acting without consent of mind. Rage becomes not choice but reflex, leaving shame in its wake once transformation fades. Yet within this pain lies power. Some stories show the wolf as protector, rage turned against abuser, trauma transformed into strength. The wolf thus becomes double-edged, curse of loss, but also shield forged from suffering. This interpretation resonates in cultures scarred by war and violence. Post-war horror films often depicted werewolves as veterans broken by conflict, transformed into beasts by memory of killing. Trauma made them dangerous but also deeply tragic. Thus, the werewolf symbolizes rage born of wounds. It is horror because it destroys, tragedy because it stems from pain, and myth because it gives shape to suffering no words can hold. The wolf howls, and in its howl is memory of everything broken. Another modern metaphor casts the wolf as addiction. Transformation becomes cycle of craving, indulgence, and regret. The full moon is trigger, hunger, the obsession, the aftermath, shame. Stories frame the werewolf as addict, trapped between denial and relapse. Characters often swear never again, yet fall under compulsion when moon rises. Their curse mirrors struggle of alcoholism, drug use, or compulsive desire. The wolf is not only predator of flesh, but predator of willpower, consuming resolve night after night. This metaphor stretches further into forbidden desires. Lust, obsession, and sexual hunger often merge with wolf imagery. Transformation into beast dramatizes loss of control, crossing of taboos. Gothic and modern works alike frame wolf as dark lover, both dangerous and irresistible. Psychology interprets this through compulsion. Addiction is beast within, not easily slain, only managed. The silver bullet becomes sobriety, fleeting and fragile. The wolf is relapse personified, waiting for weakness to re-emerge. Horror here lies, not only in claws, but in inevitability. Yet even this reading holds complexity. Some works frame wolf as liberation, indulgence of passion long denied. Desire becomes monstrous, but also authentic. Addiction as curse and longing as liberation blur into same image, the wolf within. Thus the werewolf becomes symbol of craving whether for drink, blood, or touch. Addiction and desire share same cycle. Hunger, surrender, regret. In this cycle, the wolf endures as both curse and tempum. Not all modern readings cast the wolf as curse. Some reclaim it as symbol of empowerment. Transformation becomes liberation, escape from repression, breaking of chains, discovery of strength. The wolf is no longer shame, but freedom. Feminist writers reframed werewolf as emblem of suppressed rage and desire unleashed. Stories like Ginger Snaps turned curse into metaphor for female adolescence and sexuality, not as punishment, but as power. To become wolf was to claim body, to seize voice society silenced. Queer writers too embraced wolf as symbol of identity. Transformation under moonlight mirrored coming out. Terrifying yet liberating. Feared by society but true to self. In this reading, the wolf is not abomination but authenticity, clawed into existence despite repression. Even in popular media, empowerment shines. Superhero stories recast werewolves as protectors, warriors, leaders of packs. Once solitary, now communal, the wolf becomes figure of belonging. Transformation is not exile, but initiation, proof of strength, loyalty, and resilience. Psychology that echoes this turn. What was once shadow can become power if embraced. Rage can defend. Desire can connect. Hunger can fuel. The beast within is no longer only destruction, but possibility. The wolf becomes symbol of agency reclaimed from a fear. Thus the werewolf survives in modern culture not only as curse but as anthem. It is beast and beauty, wound and weapon, shame and strength. To howl at moon is no longer merely tragedy. It is declaration of self. The werewolf may seem product of imagination, yet science asks why so many cultures share this myth. Folklorists argue the wolf endures because it embodies primal fear. Wolves were once Europe's greatest predators, haunting forests, raiding livestock, threatening villagers. The stories were survival tools, warnings in the shape of myth. Fear gave shape to morality. A tale of neighbor turning wolf warned against greed, envy, and betrayal. A story of cursed king taught reverence for gods. In this way, folklore used wolf to teach human lessons. It was less about beasts in forest, more about beasts within. Anthropologists trace werewolf myths across continents. In Greece, it was punishment of hubris. Among Norse, it was warrior's trance. In France, it was pact with devil. The common thread is transformation. Man becomes beast when order fails. The wolf becomes universal, shorthand for loss of control. Science sees werewolf myth as mirror of ecological reality. In centuries when wolves roamed freely, their howls pierced night, their tracks marked snow, their hunger reminded men of fragility. The stories grew from real encounters embroidered into legend. Thus, folklore explains persistence of the myth. It endured not because transformation was seen, but because wolves were seen and feared. Science cannot prove men became wolves, but it can show why so many believed it possible. The myth is not only fantasy, it is memory carved into story. Science often explains the wolf, not through myth, but through medicine. Physicians trace werewolf belief to misunderstood diseases. Rabies, for example, turns man into beast. Saliva foams. Fear of water rages. Aggression consumes. In an age before germ theory, such symptoms seemed nothing less than curse of wolf. Other explanations lie in psychology. Lycanthropy, diagnosed since antiquity, describes condition where patient believes himself transformed into wolf. Accounts tell of men howling, running on all fours, demanding raw flesh. Modern psychiatry sees this as delusion, rare but real, shaped by cultural myth. Where superstition saw beast, medicine sees illness. Even skin diseases played role. Hypertrichosis, a genetic disorder that causes excessive hair growth, marked sufferers as wolfmen in villages that did not understand biology. To those fearful of wilderness, their appearance confirmed superstition. Epilepsy to fed the myth. Seizures that struck by night, convulsions that shook the body were seen as moments of transformation. Without medical explanation, people saw fur and fangs where none existed. Thus, medicine reframes the werewolf. It is not literal beast, but misunderstood body, a symptom mistaken for curse, an illness made into legend. Where once priests burned victims, doctors now diagnose patients. Yet the myth persists because science can explain symptoms, but not erase the shadow they cast. Beyond medicine, genetics offers theories for wolfmen. Hypertrichosis, once called werewolf syndrome, is explained as rare mutation producing hair across body. In earlier centuries, such births inspired legend of cursed bloodlines, families marked as half-human. Other disorders mimic transformation. Porphyria, a blood disease, causes sensitivity to light lesions. Madness. Patients retreat into shadows, their pale skin and sharp teeth exaggerated into monstrous rumors. Some scholars argue Feria may explain not only werewolves, but vampires as well. Science of hormones also plays role. Disorders of adrenaline or testosterone fuel aggression, hair growth, and violence. Villagers once whispered of wolves when confronted with men overcome by rage. Modern endocrinology reframes what superstition once condemned. Yet even genetics cannot erase fascination. To name mutation does not kill myth. Instead, it reshapes it. Documentaries speak of wolfmen with rare syndromes, science framing them as both patients and legends. The curse becomes condition, but shadow remains. In popular imagination, science and myth blur. Films and novels speak of werewolf gene, a dormant trait waiting to awaken. Though no such gene exists, the idea captures imagination. The possibility that savagery is written into blood itself. Thus, genetics provides explanation, but also extension. By grounding myth in biology, it keeps story alive. The wolf may not stalk forests, but perhaps it sleeps in DNA, not curse of gods, but code of flesh. Science dismisses transformation, yet folklore persists in cryptid sightings. From rural America to Eastern Europe, tales speak of wolfmen stalking highways, farm fields, lonely woods. Eyewitnesses describe tall creatures, furred bodies, glowing eyes. To believers, these are not myths, but encounters. One of the most famous is the Beast of Bray Road, reported in Wisconsin during late 20th century. Locals told of wolf-like creature prowling farmland, standing upright, terrifying drivers. Newspapers named it modern werewolf, blending legend with journalism. Elsewhere, sightings echo same pattern. In France, tales of werewolf merge with stories of wild men. In South America, Lobeson stalks villagers. These legends persist into modernity, keeping wolf alive outside cinema and science. Skeptics argue misidentification. Dogs, bears, even men in costume. Psychology calls them cultural hallucinations shaped by fear and expectation. Yet persistence is striking. In each new century, wolves resurface in stories adapted to landscape of time. Cryptozoologists collect these tales, treating them as folklore, searching woods for proof. Though evidence remains absent, belief remains strong. The cryptid wolf proves that myth does not need fact to endure. It needs only witnesses and imagination to turn shadow into SN. Thus, science calls them legends. Yet legends keep returning. The cryptid wolf is bridge between folklore and fantasy, between fear of forest and fascination with unknown. It is science denied, yet story affirmed. Ultimately, science asks not if werewolves exist, but why belief persists. Myths survive not because they are true, but because they are useful. The wolf is story we tell about danger, desire, and difference. It shifts shape with each age, embodying fears science cannot fully erase. Psychology calls this projection. We place fears into beasts to face them safely. Sociology calls it control. Myths warn against breaking rules, against hunger and rage. Anthropology calls it survival. Wolf teaches community to beware wilderness, to respect what hunts in night. Even neuroscience finds explanation. Fear of predators is ancient imprint coded into brain from millennia of survival. Stories of wolfmen echo this instinct, giving it voice and shape. Science cannot banish the howl because the howl lives in us. Belief today continues in new forms. Online forums share modern sightings. Films reinvent wolf each decade. Novels explore it as symbol of identity. Science may dismiss the beast, but imagination resurrects it endlessly. Thus the science of belief concludes, werewolf is not monster but mirror. Each culture, each century reflects itself in shape of wolf. Medicine explains symptoms. Genetics explains mutations, but myth explains humanity. The wolf is not only legend, it is language. A way to speak of fears that reason alone cannot hold. In the modern world, the werewolf is no longer confined to firelit villages or misty forests. It prowls through film, television, novels, games, and even online forums. No longer bound to one role, it has become shapeshift of culture itself. Sometimes monster, sometimes lover, sometimes hero, sometimes poor. Its survival proves its power to adapt, to haunt, to reflect what each age fears most. Pop culture casts the wolf across every stage. In franchises like Harry Potter and Twilight, it is rival, ally, or tragic romantic figure. In games and role-playing, it becomes players' chosen form, a way to act out hidden self. In subcultures, people call themselves Therans or otherkin, claiming spiritual bond with wolf. The line between fantasy and identity blurs. The internet keeps the howl alive. Forums share sightings, stories, and artwork. Videos claim proof of wolfmen stalking highways. Memes parody the wolf, yet even parody grants survival. In digital shadows, the beast finds new hunting ground. Thus, the werewolf today is more than horror icon. It is mirror of culture's diversity, a myth that transforms as we do. Once feared as curse, now embraced as identity. The wolf remains eternal because it is endlessly adaptable, savage and sacred, terrifying and beloved. The werewolf endures not only because it entertains, but because it reflects. Every age sees itself in the wolf. In myth, it was hubris, punished. In saga, it was warrior's frenzy. In trial, it was devil's pact. In medicine, it was madness. In psychology, it is trauma, addiction, desire. The form changes, but lesson remains. The beast is never only outside us. It is within. Modern psychology gives this myth its truest home. The shadow self, the hidden impulses we deny, are given fur and fang. The werewolf is projection of rage, grief and hunger we cannot name. When we fear neighbor as wolf, we fear reflection of self. This is why the wolf never dies. To kill it would be to kill part of humanity. It survives not because evidence proves it, but because experience demands it. Each howl is memory. Each transformation a metaphor. Thus, the beast in us explains the shadow around us. The wolf endures because it is mirror of human nature. Wildness that civilization cannot tame. Instinct that reason cannot erase. The werewolf is eternal because it is us. Every generation resurrects the wolf in its own image. Where peasants once whispered around fires, we now stream horror on glowing screens. Where elders told legends to warn children, authors now publish novels of romance and rage. Where shamans wore wolfskins in battle, fans now wear costumes at conventions, celebrating the beast, not with fear, but pride. The myth renews because it adapts. In one century, it terrifies. In another, it empowers. The wolf shifts shape as culture shifts, yet always remains wolf. To tell its story is to tell ours. Even science, though it strips away superstition, cannot strip away meaning. Genetic theories, psychiatric diagnosis, cryptid investigations, all attempt to explain away the wolf, but all keep it alive. For each article written to dismiss it, another story rises to reinvent it. The werewolf dies 1,000 deaths and is reborn 1,000 times more. Thus, the myth is immortal not because of fact, but because of need. It fills hunger for story, fear, and meaning. The wolf is not fossil of past. It is pulse of present. Wherever humans gather, the howl returns. What is the future of the werewolf? Perhaps it is already here. Virtual reality lets players embody wolf selves. Artificial intelligence creates endless new wolf stories. Genetic engineering teases possibility of altering flesh in ways once thought myth. The boundary between imagination and science blurs, and in that blur, the wolf waits. But the wolf does not need technology to survive. It thrives in story itself. As long as people wonder what lies in shadow, the werewolf endures. The future may give it new shapes, digital, virtual, biological, but the essence remains. Human face dissolving into beast. Some myths fade with time. Dragons rest in children's books. Fairies flutter only in fantasy. But the wolf, unlike these, is bound to us more tightly. It is predator we feared, animal we hunted, self we repress. This bond ensures survival. Thus, the future of the wolf is not question of extinction, but transformation. As long as humanity exists, the myth evolves. The wolf may become superhero, meme, or metaphor, but it will always be shadow of ourselves. The werewolf belongs not only to past or present, but to every tomorrow. And so the story returns to silence beneath the moon. The werewolf has walked from Greece to Hollywood, from temple to laboratory, from battlefield to internet. Each age remade it, each culture reshaped it, yet through all changes, one truth endures. The werewolf is not only story of beast, but story of us. For what we fear in wolves, we fear in ourselves. Hunger, rage, desire, grief, all given shape of fangs and fur. What we long for in wolves, we long for in ourselves. Freedom, wildness, strength, authenticity. In this paradox lies power of the myth. It terrifies and tempts, condemns and redeems, destroys and liberates. The howl still carries across forests, across him, across digital ether. It echoes, sometimes parody, sometimes poetry, sometimes rare, yet always the same, a reminder of what lurks beneath. Thus the werewolf remains eternal shadow, reflection of humanity's oldest questions. What are we? What do we hide? What beast waits in silence within? To answer is impossible. To ask is inevitable. The moon rises and the story continues. The man becomes wolf. The wolf becomes myth. The myth becomes mirror. And as long as one ear hears the howl, the werewolf will never die. As the full moon gives way to the first light of dawn, the raw and primal fear behind the werewolf legend still echoes in our minds. Completing this terrifying and suffocating panorama, we understand that humans are actually most afraid of the savagery within themselves. Take care of yourselves until we meet again on the next journey of discovery.